Helm 108!
Helm to 108. You are listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons, monsters and serpents, to Brothers of the Serpent podcast, coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 tangent cube of science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Everest Plateau. And as you probably heard from the intro, this is episode 108.
That's right. Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
yeah. Podcast. So we got the
Sacred podcast.
That's right. This is a sacred podcast. Episode 108 is a sacred number. So we got a great podcast coming up for you. But first, as always, we have space weather news from spaceweather.com, which I don't actually have pulled up yet.
But we were supposed to introduce the Watcher from space.
Yeah, we'll do that later. Where is it? There it is. What? Watcher?
I said I'm totally here.
Yeah, he is here. We've been watcherless for the past couple of shows, but he is here. Anyway, space weather. This is like totally messed up. The next solar wind stream. Earth is exiting one stream of solar wind. Another one is on the way. Estimated time of arrival, August 10th. The incoming stream is flowing from a southern hole in the sun's atmosphere. High latitude sky watchers should be alert for auroras mixed with Perseid meteors later this week. Also, these lights are not auroras. Around the world on August 5th, high-latitude sky watchers watched the sky turn red and green as a solar wind stream lashed Earth's magnetic field. A bunch of names that I cannot pronounce in Denmark saw these colors as well. But the strange thing was it was 3 days earlier and the geomagnetic storm had not started yet. On August 2nd, I went out to take some pictures of the Milky Way, says Merzkilov. When I took the first test shot, I was amazed by the brightness and the amount of airglow in the sky. It was both red and green. I can definitely say I've never captured such a bright green airglow. But that's right, these lights are not auroras, they are what's called airglow. Although airglow looks like the aurora borealis, it is not. Auroras are caused by gusts of solar wind. Airglow is caused by chemiluminescent reactions in Earth's upper atmosphere. These reactions get started during daylight hours when the atmosphere is bathed in strong UV radiation from the sun. At night, we see the afterglow colored green by oxygen atoms or sometimes red by hydroxyl ions. They are typically very faint and best captured on dark nights around the new moon.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
Camis.
All right, Watcher, come back on. What's going on, buddy? You've been saving lives. You're out there in deep space.
Yeah, working very hard.
Yeah.
Trying to hardly work and failing miserably.
Well, we sure do freaking miss you when you're not here. So hopefully we can get the schedules worked out.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
Yeah.
Which
Trying to hardly work on it.
all the time now. So, but it'll get sorted out.
Yeah. So speaking of schedules and stuff, not this week, obviously, and not next week either, but at some point, I think the week after next, we are going to be changing our podcasting schedule to Mondays. So expect a new Brothers of the Serpent podcast to come out on Monday evenings instead of Wednesday evenings like they are right now. So that's the goal. All right. What do you got?
I have a sun probe update.
All right.
From CNET.com. Right now, there's a tiny little spacecraft zipping around the sun, moving faster than any other man-made object has ever flown. The spacecraft, known as the Parker Solar Probe, coined here on Snake Bros as Sun Probe,
Sun Probe
is approaching the 1-year anniversary of its launch on August 12th, and it's been delivering some pretty stellar observations so far. After 2 flybys, Parker has been dumping data back to Earth for scientists to examine, and it's exceeding researchers' expectations. In a blog post on August 1st, researchers from Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, which designed and built the spacecraft, announced that the Parker Solar Probe had delivered 22 gigabytes of data after its second encounter with the sun finished up on May 6th, performing better than pre-launch estimates. The amount of data was 50% more than researchers previously expected to see. As we learn more about operating in this environment and these orbits, the team did a great job of increasing data downloads of the information gathered by the spacecraft's amazing instrument, said Nikolaus Pinkin, Kinney, a missions operator at JHAPL. After launch, Parker's controllers were able to maximize the way the data was downloaded and now expect to pull another 25 gigabytes of science straight off the little solar spacecraft that could between July 24th and August 15th. We've never had a probe this close to the sun, so the measurements that scientists on the ground are now evaluating have never been encountered before. Parker's 4 instruments are able to measure particles in the sun's atmosphere, its magnetic fields, the solar wind, and how electrons, protons, and ions are spilling out of the hot ball of plasma. The large cross-section of new data will greatly increase our knowledge about the sun and its effects across the entire solar system. The probe's next meeting with the sun will start on August 27th, and its closest approach will come on September 1st. On December 26th, it will fly by Venus for the second time, gathering speed as it prepares to cozy up to the sun in an even closer orbit.
Wow.
Touching the sun from 4 million miles away. Sun probe update. I got a bunch of stories here.
Oh, good. Yeah, I see. You got a stack of stuff.
I have a 4-page story here, folks, from the Wall Street Journal. Snakes! Snake bites hit record highs in Texas. Everybody knows why. I don't need to read that story. All right. FRBs. FRB FRB update. Mysterious deep space signals can now be picked up in real time. Over the past dozen years, scientists have been finding enigmatic fleeting signals called fast radio bursts, or FRBs, by poring over previous observations for the bright blips that come from the other side of the cosmos. Now, for the first time, the powerful flashes of radio waves have been picked up the moment they arrive at Earth. Doctoral student Wael Farah at Australia's Swinburne University of Technology developed an automated system that uses machine learning to capture FRBs in real time. The very first FRB was detected in 2007 with observations from 2001, and most other detections have also been made by reviewing data after the fact.
Yeah.
Exactly what FRBs are and where they come from remains one of the newest and most intriguing mysteries in space science. What we know is that they originate from very powerful sources on the other side of the universe. We're talking billions of light years from us, and last just milliseconds. Only a handful of FRBs so far have been observed to repeat themselves, a characteristic that makes them easier to trace to a source galaxy. Farah said part of his motivation for studying FRBs is that they can be used to study the darker parts of the cosmos between galaxies that are otherwise almost impossible to see. It is fascinating to discover that a signal that traveled halfway through the universe, reaching our telescope after a journey of a few billion years, exhibits complex structure, like peaks separated by less than a millisecond, he said in a statement. Farah's system has been used at the Malanglo Radio Observatory in Australia and has already identified 5 FRBs, including one of the most powerful ever picked up and one of the broadest yet. The details have been published in the September 2019 issue of Monthly Notices of the Astronomical Society. The project team is hopeful that grabbing FRBs as they arrive will provide the clearest picture yet of the mysterious signals. Malanglo's real-time detection system allows us to fully exploit its high time and frequency resolution and probe FRB properties that were previously unobtainable, said project leader Matthew Bales. Possible explanations for FRBs range from powerful pulsars to advanced aliens. But now that we have artificial intelligence essentially locked in on their fleeting frequencies, the mystery is a step closer to eventually being solved.
All right.
And you should see this telescope.
The one they're using?
It's like a curved, like a concave curved plane. But it's rectangular, and it just in the picture it just goes off.
Wow!
And the whole, it's mounted like an old satellite dish, satellite telescope.
Yeah.
But it's this massive curved rectangle, just extremely long, just running down this. I guess I don't know where it is.
Can they
in Australia?
Is it like articulatable? Like
I don't
they
think
can
it.
move it.
No, I think it just looks up and down. Like it can move.
So it's
point up
based
and
on
down.
wherever it's on the Earth is like. So it's looking across the sky as it goes.
Yeah, and I don't even know if it even moves.
Yeah. Well, it's like
It looks like it could,
Yeah.
move like change its axis up and down.
Because there was a radio telescope, the one that heard the famous wow signal was a fixed telescope. It's like it was actually in the ground.
Yeah.
And wherever it was looking just was wherever it was pointing based on the Earth's rotation in space.
Yeah, that's one of those ones where you figure out what you want to look at way in advance.
Yeah.
When it's going to be.
And then when it swings by, you get 72 seconds to look at it, basically.
Yep. 72 months of planning.
That's right.
72
2
seconds
seconds
of
of
viewing. I got one more.
All right, good.
From Honolulu AP. Scientists have discovered that a growing pond of water inside a Hawaii crater is being heated by Kilauea volcano. The U.S. Geological Survey said Tuesday that temperature readings taken over the weekend show that a growing pool of water in Kilauea volcano's Halemauau crater, the former home of a popular lava lake, is about 158 degrees Fahrenheit, 70 degrees Celsius. So there was a previous story that I had bookmarked, but I found this is the most recent one.
Okay.
Basically, this massive lava lake that has been around since we've been observing, in I don't know, past 200 years or whatever,
Right.
is now gone, and now water is forming in the caldera. For the first time in recorded history, the presence of water in the crater was confirmed last week. Since then, scientists have found two other small pools of water nearby. The crater floor collapsed about 2,000 feet, 610 meters.
Whoa.
And the lava lake disappeared last summer as Kilauea stopped erupting for the first time in over 30 years. USGS geologist Matt Patrick told the Associated Press on Tuesday that it's hard to determine how deep the magma chamber is beneath the bottom of the crater floor where the water was found. Quote, "I don't think it's possible to really determine too much about how deep the magma is below," Patrick said. "There's always a lot of gas coming through the surface, also a lot of sulfur output, so that is kind of heating it and mixing in with the water. One of the first things researchers hope to do is gather samples of the water so they can determine its composition and possibly better understand what's happening underground. The bottom of the crater, which has long been the main conduit for Kilauea's erupting lava, is now below the water table," officials said last week. "The area is inaccessible and dangerous because of pooling gases and other hazards, so researchers will likely use a helicopter to lower a bucket into the bottom of the crater to collect water samples," Patrick said. I wouldn't want to be that pilot.
Don't want to be that guy.
USGS geologist Janet Babb said observations made Tuesday show the water level continues to rise and the three ponds are starting to merge into one. A small pond was first spotted on July 25th, and the water has continued to rise since. In certain circumstances, underground magma interacting with groundwater can create explosive eruptions.
Yeah.
However, USGS researchers say an eruption is not imminent, and the public alert level for the volcano has not changed. Historically, Kilauea has gone through long periods of explosive phases that have lasted hundreds of years. The volcano then goes through phases of slower, so-called effusive eruptive periods. Kilauea has been in an effusive state for about 200 years. Geologists also took video of steam rising from the pond. USGS set up a webcam to monitor the water inside the Halemauau crater and will continue to make observations and watch for changes.
Wow. So it collapsed like
2,000
feet. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Right, so the watcher is saying the WOW signal was a strong narrowband radio signal received on August 15th, 1977 by Ohio State University's Big Ear radio telescope. Yeah, that's what it was called, Big Ear.
In the U.S.
Yep, which was then used to support the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And that signal has never been explained either. It could have been an FRB though. Like they didn't know about them back then. You could have swung past an FRB and then the signal jumps in that particular band and everybody's like, wow.
Yeah. They're like, wow.
Wow. So this is going to be a short segment. We only got a couple more minutes. we got some great emails, which I'll have to read either the next show or maybe at the end of this show. I don't know. But I do have a couple of comments I want to read here. They're comments from iTunes, from the iTunes ratings, right? So the reviews. So this one is called Serpent Lexicon Needed. This is from Corvus Flies. It says, these guys rock. Granted, I don't always agree with them, and sometimes it feels like what they're saying is coming out of, I don't know, their butt flaps. But they are clearly brilliant and terribly funny, and I love the topics they explore. I also think they need a written lexicon for those who are just discovering this podcast. I am on episode 44, still binging, so I think I've graduated to intermediate level. Some suggestions. Now he has some definitions here. Butt flap, a term which could be used when discussing Neanderthals, ancient ancestors, natives in the jungle. Slightly derogatory, but used with endearment. Skirp derps. There is contention on the spelling of this word. Could be used in place of highly educated academics too afraid to lose their non-tenured job or respect of their peers to be real scientists and ask questions. There are so many more words that need defining for serpent noobs, but I am running out of room here. Well, Corvus, thank you so much for the great review, and you are in luck. When you get to like episode 46, we start going through the Snake Bros glossary, which we now have decided we need to call these Serpentcon or something, because your Serpent Lexicon is a way better name. So, yeah.
I would have to say that the butt flaps is not so much a derogatory term for ancient peoples in loincloths, but it's making fun of the standard model scientists who think that everybody in ancient times was running around in butt flaps.
Right. That's right.
That's what we're making fun of.
That's right. Also, your definition of skirpderp is actually the definition of skirptard. It's just that Kyle and I screw that up so often that I don't blame you.
Not your fault.
Not your fault for getting it wrong. All right.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah. Next one here. Reptilian overlords. Hello, snakes. I must say that I thoroughly enjoy this podcast. I listen to multiple podcasts, and this is definitely a top priority for me. Since learning of you from Grimerica, Grimerica Swapcast, thank you for your leadership on the platform of podcasting my overlords. Your humble serpent Sab from Sab P via Apple Podcasts in Australia. Thanks, Sab.
Sabs.
And the last one I'm going to read here before we go to the next segment is Zoot Suit Giants. This is from Inra Rosewood from Great Britain. Hey, Snake Bros. Absolutely love the podcast. I checked you guys out after hearing you on Where Did the Road Go? You guys make me laugh, and it is informative. I actually listened to your band. Please, could you make a song about the Zoot Suit Giants throwing back a keg of beer? Thanks, guys, for the hours of interesting subject matter and laughs. Inra. So you have inspired us, and we have been writing lyrics for Zoot Suit Giants. And maybe one day we will we'll bust it out on the show. Just perform it with a drum and a guitar.
Yeah.
We've gotten some hilarious.
Russ just started sending out lyrics. Oh, man,
yeah.
I was cracking up. Yeah. We should be able to complete it shortly.
Yeah. Yours were great. I can't cut granite with copper tools. Freaking awesome, dude. Yeah, it's going to be great, Inra. So we'll do it. But for now, we're going to go ahead and take our break. I know it's a bit early, but we will come back after the break, and you guys will understand why. Snakes!
Ladies and gentlemen, we are back, and we are very happy to welcome back to the Snake Bros show the one and only Randall Carlson, along with Bradley, the traveling companion of Randall, fellow researcher, cameraman, scale man, and cliff stander on it. How are you guys doing?
I am all that, and I am here.
So yeah, for episode 108, we had to have Randall come blow our minds about numerology and all things associated with sacred numbers. How's it going, Randall?
No, pretty good. Good, man. I'm here.
Heck yeah. Episode
You know?
108.
So,
Beautiful.
episode 108. Well,
Apropos.
that's certainly an auspicious number,
Yes, sir.
as you probably well know.
We do because of you.
Oh, because of me.
That's right.
So, that's right. Go ahead. Blame it all on me.
It is entirely your fault that we fell down the number rabbit hole. So
Well, it's very gratifying to me to know that it is that I'm responsible for your sanity. There was an old saying back in the 60s, a mind blown is a mind shown. That was kind of my philosophy of life for a few years, during those years of mind-blowing experimentation to see how far you could get
yeah.
outside the bounds of normal, conventional reality. Yeah. So
Well, that explains a lot. Now I
luckily, I made it. I made it. I was able to find my way back, though. Mostly,
yeah.
not completely.
I would say that, yeah.
Mostly.
I was going to say, I don't think you completely found your way all the way back, but it's a good thing.
You learned a couple rap songs and eventually
A hell of a
meandered
journey.
back into reality.
Yeah. So numbers. Well, numbers, of course, are the key to a lot of things. They were always foremost in the minds of scholars of old, and the sacred side of numbers has sort of been neglected. Now they're just, considered to be purely secular, purely without any connotations of anything beyond just a, day-to-day pragmatic use. But if we go back to some of the great thinkers of history, Galileo, for example, he said mathematics is the alphabet with which God has written the universe. I've always liked that.
That is
Yeah,
a good
that's
quote.
great.
Johannes Kepler said geometry existed before the creation. It is co-eternal with the mind of God. Geometry provided God with a model for the creation. Isn't that nice? St. Augustine said numbers are the thoughts of God. Yeah. So
So like mathematics is the language of creation is the idea.
that's the idea. Mathematics is the language of creation, and specifically geometry. Geometry was considered to be a key, and that's why geometry was taught in the the Platonic Academy and the Pythagorean lodges.
Oh, yeah.
Plato had that famous quote over his over the entrance to his academy. And so I'm going to do a little screen share here showing the quote. I don't know if we can see. Can you guys see?
We're seeing it. I think we're
Let
seeing it.
none enter here who are ignorant of geometry. Now notice this. This is I like this a lot. I believe this was from Manly Palmer Hall, and what you're seeing here is the entrance to an ancient Masonic temple, an idealized version. And
We
you've
were
got the
actually
two
looking-
pillars, the
wait
left
a
pillar
second.
and the right pillar.
Wait a second, Randall. We're seeing
seeing a
here is
slideshow.
wisdom, revelation.
Oh, what are you seeing?
We're seeing-
Okay, let me try this.
Yeah, change your screen share. We're seeing the Revelation 13:18 quote.
How did that get there? We were going to get into that. So,
That's the next part. Yeah.
well, no, since it's up now, let's go ahead and look at it. This is from Proverbs chapter 8. I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning, or ever the earth was, while as yet he had not made the earth, nor the fields, nor the highest part of the dust of the world. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set his compass upon the face of the deep. Now, are you seeing this? The Ancient of Days, the famous painting by William Blake, which was inspired by the verse I just read.
No, we're still seeing
It says, "Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast." That's what we're seeing.
Oh,
it's the PowerPoint.
we don't
cabals.
We don't want to see that.
Here we go.
Now,
Yeah, I see your mouse.
But I think you just need to stop that. You need to stop that screen share and start the.
Yeah, share a different screen.
I think you're right.
There
Yeah,
you go.
There we go.
We'll learn how to do this, folks.
Yeah, we're getting it.
We'll learn how to do this. Okay, so I am going to do a screen share and share. Okay.
Now
There it is, the Ancient of Days.
There he is, the Ancient of Days, setting his compass upon the face of the deep.
Yes.
And so the idea here is the turning of the compass. The turning of the compass sets the worlds into motion. It sets the universe into motion. It induces the angular momentum. This is the initial impulse that introduced the angular momentum into the universe, because everything we see is rotating, right?
Right.
Everything is spinning. Everything is turning. Everything is in orbit, right? We know that the moon orbits the earth. The earth orbits the sun. The sun orbits the galaxy. One of the interesting questions is there any intermediate orbital centers between the sun and the center of the galaxy? That's something we could discuss someday.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some tantalizing traditions suggest that is in fact the case, that you might think of it as an eddy within the galactic wheel, and it has created a sub-galactic orbital system.
Huh.
And we can certainly get into that at some point, because that could be a very interesting insight into a lot of the ancient mysteries. So here's the quote I just read.
Oh, okay.
I was set up from everlasting, from the beginning, or wherever the earth was. The key is the last sentence. When he prepared the heavens, I was there. When he set his compass upon the face of the deep, and that was the inspiration. That verse was the inspiration behind this famous painting, "The Ancient of Days," by William Blake. So that was the idea.
So the hand holding
here, and we will see.
The hand holding the compass the hand holding the compass there is implying that he is turning it. Is that the idea? He's setting everything in motion with the spinning. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. He's going to turn the compass, and that's what sets the universe in motion. So that's kind of an interesting idea, that there was a divine impulse at the moment of creation.
Yes.
So, yeah. And this was presented in Robert Lawler's classic work on sacred geometry, which I highly recommend. He showed how word creation, written in Japanese Zen calligraphy, as it says here, from right to left.
Oh, wow.
And this is the sequence of, so the first act of creation would be the drawing of the circle. And once you have the circle, you can then generate the equilateral triangle within the circle very easily, because you have this elegant relationship between the circumference of a circle and its radius, which is that once you draw the circle, you can start at any point on the circumference of the circle, and you take your compass. You don't change the setting of your compass at all. You draw the circle, then you take your compass, you set the point of your compass anywhere on the circle, and if you're careful, you will discover that you can step around the compass, around the circumference of the circle with your compass exactly 6 times. So right there's kind of it suggests that the whole idea of a cycle of creation taking 6 days is metaphorical for a geometric exercise, because now what you've got is you draw the circle, and with the compass you can generate 6 points around the circumference of the circle, and the central point, the 7th point, is the point of rest. Does that make sense?
It does.
The compass there, yeah. You see the geometric analogy there?
Right. And are those
Now,
6
once
points 2 triangles? Is that the idea too? Is that where you're getting at?
Yes. So now you can generate 2, an upward pointing and a downward pointing triangle. This
Wow.
so-called Seal of Solomon within that circle. And you can also generate a hexagon. If you connect each successive point around the circle, you get a 6-sided polygon, which is the hexagon. And if you connect alternate points, alternate vertices now, you'll get an upward pointing equilateral triangle and a downward pointing.
Right.
So from the circle, you can generate the 6 points around the circumference. You can then easily generate the equilateral triangle. And then by a further subsequent step, you can generate right angles and rectangles. So a circle is the simplest, and it's the first generating form of geometry from which everything else comes. Then the equilateral triangle is it's probably the simplest. Well, it is the simplest of the regular polygons. And then from there, you can generate squares and rectangles. But they're a little bit more complicated, see? So you can see that this sequence read from right to left is geometrically correct. It's going from circle angle to rectangle, and that would be the sequence from simplest to more complex forms.
Right.
Then through the combination of triangle and rectangle, or triangle and square, you can generate all of the polygons, understanding how, once you relate the two to each other. And then one of the interesting secrets of that was how to generate a 5-pointed polygon out of that. And that's something that I used to teach regularly in sacred geometry classes. And when I used to do the sacred geometry classes, which I'm sure I will probably do again when the time is right, when we have the place to do it, it was all hands-on. So the idea was each person was given a straight edge and a compass and led through the sequence of exercises pretty much like you would have done if you were back in Plato's Academy or, Pythagoras' Lodge, and you were learning geometry. That's how it was taught, hands-on, compass and an unmarked straight edge. And with those two implements, you could generate the whole corpus of geometry, starting out with the 2D planar geometry. But once you've got that, you can then, through a process of transmutation, if you will, you can evolve upward into the 3-dimensional geometries. And basically that comes about because once you've generated the 2-dimensional geometries in the plane, you can fold those geometries up into the 3rd dimension, into the z-axis, and now generate your polyhedra, which are the 3-dimensional objects. Does that make sense, what I just said?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because you've got in your plane, you've got your x and y axis, and in your z axis, like if your x and y axes would be perpendicular to each other, your z axis then would be perpendicular to those and give you a what am I trying to say here? I just
Give you a 3-dimensional area to work in.
Internet is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it gives you can fold up into that z axis, you get the polyhedra. I got a message came up and said my internet connection was unstable.
Uh-oh.
Hopefully we're not going to have the problem.
Yeah, it's a little glitchy, but we're understanding everything you're saying, and
Yeah.
it's great.
It is a little glitchy.
But I wanted to ask you about that Zen calligraphy there. Does anyone know how old those symbols are? Like how long ago did somebody come up?
I'm sure we're going back centuries.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Probably back at least to the Middle Ages, maybe much longer. So let's see, I've got another image to share here. Have you ever seen this before?
Yeah, that kind of looks familiar.
Okay, now you'll notice you've got a compass set at 60 degrees, which then implies an equilateral triangle. And you have the square set at 90 degrees, which of course is the right angle. So it's through the combination of the 60-degree angle or the equilateral triangle and the 90-degree angle or the square that you can now generate the whole family of regular polygons. And then, from those. And so you see here, this is basically the Masonic symbol, because at the core of all the Masonic symbolry and philosophy is the art and science of geometry.
Right. So some people say the G stands for God, but are you saying it's geometry or the great architect?
The letter G actually can have several meanings.
Okay.
But the meaning that's generally inculcated in lodge traditions is right there with the two instruments,
Right.
But
Okay.
what are these instruments of? Right?
Geometry.
Geometry.
Right.
And there's a beautiful lecture in Freemasonry that talks about this. That geometry was the first and noblest of sciences, it's referred to, and is the basis upon which the superstructure of Freemasonry is based. So yeah, it's there. It's part of the whole system. It's the core of the system.
Right.
But like I was reading earlier, I mean, to the ancient world, I mean, geometry was considered almost like a divine science.
Yes.
And in a lot of cases, propagated in secret.
Huh. That is a beautiful picture right there.
Isn't that? Yeah. So this really kind of emphasizes the rotary motion of this planet we live on.
Right. So we're looking at it. That's an observatory, and we're looking at a long exposure towards the North Pole. Is that the idea? Or maybe the South Pole?
Yeah, here's the North Pole. This is I found this on the internet years ago.
Oh,
and
man.
actually, you can see right up here at the center, that little thick dash, that's Polaris, the North Star.
Ah, wow.
So it's an interesting exercise to go, like on a summer evening, go out and sit facing north for a couple hours and just, you can actually see this motion taking place.
Right.
And this is what, I would tell some of these flat earth folks to go out and,
Yeah. Well, the disc is rotating, Randall. Come on. The flat disc of the Earth is spinning, so that's why that happens.
yeah, but you see, it wouldn't look like this, though.
Yeah, I know.
This is a sphere with an axis.
That's right.
A spherical object rotating about an axis. That's what is generating this.
Yeah.
Well, you see, this is not a full exposure. This is not a full 24-hour exposure. This is
Right, because you can see the star lines are just they're not all the way around. So
right, but it certainly does convey the rotary nature of our diurnal existence.
yes.
So, yeah, and then that goes back to this idea, which was a frontispiece to a 12th century Bible. And this is God, who is kind of, depicted in the conventional form of Jesus, but it's supposed to be God, the master builder of worlds. And notice again the idea here about to inscribe a circle, but you see that within that circle you've got chaos, and so the compass is going to bring order out of that chaos.
Ah.
And set things into motion, because without motion there's no life. That's the idea. You have to have motion to have life. If everything was just still and static rather than dynamic, it would all be a dead universe.
Right. So you need a little bit of chaos and a little bit of order to have.
You need this balance of chaos and order, because if it's all order, again, then it becomes static.
Static. That's right.
The chaos will, induce evolutionary change.
Yes.
So
Yeah, I've always thought that was a fascinating idea that there's an overlapping of chaos and order, and that's the basic premise of how you have an evolving universe. You've got to have both of them.
you got to have both of them, exactly. And so here's Paul Jacques Griot, who was an architect. One of the early books that I read, showing architecture and architectural design connected with geometry. And as he says here, the world around us is a world of numbers that spell life and harmony. They are organized by the geometry of figures, all related to one another according to a sublime order into dynamic symmetry. Glimpses into this magnificent kingdom formed the basis of all our knowledge, and it seems that in this domain, the ancient civilizations had gone further than modern science. Really a kind of a radical thing to say back in 1960.
Yeah. Well, we talk about it on the podcast all the time, that ancient civilizations have gone further than modern science in some aspects, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm going to stop the share now. So there's an old Masonic lecture that's quite beautiful. I'll quote a little bit out of it.
Okay.
And this is sort of in the, it's in the public domain, I think. So I'm not breaking any vows or anything here. This is probably going back to the 1700s even. If we consider the symmetry and order which govern all the works of creation, we must admit that geometry pervades the universe. The ancient philosophers placed such a high estimate upon this science that all who frequented the groves of the sacred academy were compelled to explore its heavenly paths, and no one whose mind was unexpanded by its precepts was entrusted with the instruction of the young. By geometry, we may curiously trace nature through her various windings to her most concealed recesses. By it, we discover how the planets move in their respective orbits and demonstrate their various revolutions. By it, we account for the return of the seasons and the variety of the scenes which each season displays to the discerning eye. By it, we discover the power, wisdom, and goodness of the grand artificer of the universe, and view with delight the proportions which connect the vast machine. Numberless worlds around us, all framed by the same divine artist, which roll through the vast expanse and are all governed by the same unerring law of nature. So that's an old Masonic lecture. I don't know of any lodges that do that lecture anymore. There's more to it than what I quoted here. But and then we have an inscription from an ancient 2nd century Chinese tomb, which gets us a little more specific into the ideas of geometry. He who understands the earth is a wise man, and he who understands the heavens is a sage. Knowledge is derived from the straight line shadow, and that is derived from the right angled joint. The combination of the right angle with numbers is what guides and rules the 10,000 things. And we will do another quick screen share here. This is from Keith Critchlow's work. Time Stands Still. Highly recommend it to anybody who's interested in this kind of subject matter. These are Borneo tribesmen here. They've set that stick into the ground, which then casts a shadow and makes a right angled joint. And from that simple stick in the ground, they can essentially measure the heavens. They can measure the span of the year. They can lay out a magnificent geometric template upon the surface of the ground. I'm not sure exactly what these fellas are doing here, but they are definitely tracking the shadow cast by this vertical pole or stick set into the ground, which is basically serving the same function as, for example, an obelisk in Egypt.
Right.
You see, when you have an obelisk with a sharp point at the top, that means the shadow has a sharp point. And through the course of the day, that shadow swings in a great arc around. It not only is swinging around, but it's also first shortening and then growing again in length. So if you have a pole in the ground and you draw a circle around it and you begin to track the shadow, as the sun rises, the shadow shortens. Early in the morning, the shadows of anything will be long, won't they?
Right.
At noon, at high noon, the shadow will be the shortest.
Uh-oh.
Grows to the east, right? And the shadows as you get towards dusk, they get longer and longer until eventually they would become theoretically infinite in length. But what they have done is they've traced out a geometry on the ground that can be mapped. And then from that geometry, you can determine the cardinal directions and you can lay out whatever geometric template you want. So when the architects of old were going to build, the first thing they did after they had identified the omphalos, or the navel center of the temple, which was allegorically the navel of the world. The omphalos was the Greek word that meant navel. Usually there would be somebody who had a skill, a divining skill, or some type of extrasensory ability, who would determine where the sacred center was, the omphalos. And then through an act of acupuncture, once that omphalos, which was found at the intersection of the Earth's meridian lines, the acupuncture needle or the pole or the staff would be inserted into that point. And then through tracking the shadows, the temple would be laid out, the template. Notice the word temple and template. You see? Also notice the similarity of the word temporal, which means time, right? Because the temple was based on a template, was an image of time frozen.
Man, we've given archaeologists so much flack for calling everything that they find a temple or a tomb, but yeah, I guess we have to strike temple from that one, because I never put that together. That's great.
That's awesome. Temple.
Well, yeah. So that was kind of the idea behind the temple, and just any old building couldn't be a temple. Obviously, it had to conform to certain principles. For one, the first thing I said was the identification of the omphalos, and then from there. And see, here's the other thing to bear in mind, guys. When you put that pole in the earth and you start creating templates from the shadows, they're all going to vary depending on your latitude.
Right.
So the geometry that's generated, at 23.5 degrees north is not going to be the same as that generated from 45 degrees north. And so you get a template that is attuned to that particular place on the earth.
Right. So I have a question about the pole real quick. I'm just looking at this picture you've got here. And Kyle and I are builders, and we've done a lot of surveying. And so you have to make sure that pole is like actually vertical. So did they have a way of doing that to make sure that it was actually perfectly straight up and down?
I'm sure they do. And I'm not sure how these fellows here would have done that.
Yeah.
Of course, I do it with a plumb bob.
Right. Plumb bob is what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I would do it. I do it with the plumb bob. And there is let's see, I may have another slide here I can pull up. Let's see if I've got it handy that shows the process.
God, look at all those slides. One day.
Maybe it's not here. Okay,
That's all right. I just wanted to know if
it's in a different program. Well, yeah, it's basically, imagine that you set up a something that looks like the Greek letter pi. So you've got two verticals and a horizontal, and you essentially hang a plumb bob from the horizontal.
right.
Is how it was actually done. I don't know how they're plumbing this particular staff.
So you can measure at the at where the plumb bob is if it's closer to one pole or the other, and then you can stand in line with the two poles to see if the plumb bob is sticking out on either side, and that would give you your two axes.
Genius.
We need to sell that transit. Just get a plumb bob.
Well, to me, it's fun to combine, modern technology with some ancient techniques.
Yes.
Yeah, agreed.
To me, that's a lot of fun.
You were telling us, so you were talking about that, you put the pole on the ground, you make sure that it's absolutely vertical using a plumb bob or whatever your technique is. And then you draw the circle around the pole, and so the pole has to be at the exact center of that circle you draw. And then you mark where the shadow crosses the line. When the tip of the shadow comes in and crosses the line, you mark that spot, and then you wait for the other side. Then you wait for dusk.
Here's what you do: you got a picture. You got that pole, and you draw a circle around it, a fairly large circle.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Depends on the height of the pole. I mean, you could actually do this on a really small scale. You could have in fact, when I was teaching geometry classes to kids a decade or two ago, I would just have a piece of plywood with a dowel stuck in it. You take that outside and have a circle around. So you can do it on a really small scale. Obviously, if you do it on a larger scale, you're going to get greater accuracy. And if you're going to actually build a structure, you would want to get it pretty accurate. So what you're going to do is you're going to draw a circle, and this would be done by using a rope or a chain. Oftentimes you might have a chain with a round link on the end, and you would slide that over the pole, right? And each link in the chain would be a specified length, and you pull the chain out, and by counting the number of links, you could then determine a radius, which is actually a more accurate way than doing a knotted rope, which would also work. But I like the chain method because each link is very uniform.
Right.
Yeah.
So then you draw your circle. Okay, so now the sun is rising, and it's rising in the east, so your shadow is going to point to the west, and it's going to be really long. Now, as the sun's rising up, the shadow is shortening at the same time it's swinging around. So somewhere, depending on the relationship between the length of the pole and the radius of the circle, somewhere you want to set it up so somewhere around maybe mid-morning or even a little earlier, the point of the shadow will intersect the circle. And when it does, at that point of intersection, you'd drive a stake. Now you'd wait, and then as the sun shifts over to the west, the shadow is now pointing to the east. And as the sun is setting, the shadow is getting longer. Sometime during late afternoon, the point of the shadow is now going to touch the circle again. You drive the second stake there. Now, and I've done this. Okay, so now you drive a stake in each one.
Yeah.
I would probably take a small nail and put in the top of each stake, and then you take a piece of mason's line, tie it off on one stake, stretch it to the other one, tie it off, and that pretty much will give you a very accurate east-west line.
That's freaking awesome.
Yes.
How do they figure this out?
I have a question about that. So you've got the height of the pole and then the radius of the circle. That's going to determine the difference in time between the point intersecting one side, the eastern side and the western side.
Yeah.
But is there a way to make the ratio such that it's, say, 8 hours or to know? You see what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, I mean, you could work all that out, but you don't really almost need to. It's more an empirical process than a theoretical process. Obviously, if your circle is too big, it's going to be awkward. If it's too small, like in this case, if you're looking back at the two Borneo tribesmen, you would want your circle to be 3 or 4 times, its radius to be at least 3 or 4 times the length of the pole.
Okay.
See?
Because the bigger the circle, the higher the resolution of your east-west
Yes.
line, basically. Okay,
Yes.
I'm wondering because like the pyramid, like the Great Pyramid, there's something about the 52-degree angle on the sides, and then the height of the pyramid relationship to the circumference of the circle is the pi relationship. Isn't that right?
I think so. Yeah.
So I wonder if you take that relationship, what is the time difference? Or so you see what I'm saying? I was just curious, like if there's that would be interesting.
Well, that time difference is going to be, based upon the ratio between the length of the pole and the radius of the circle. And what you don't want to do is obviously, if you try to do it too early, the shadow is going to be too damn long. You don't want to have to go out, 600 or 800 feet, and have a circle that big.
Yeah.
You want to have a circle that's, 20 or 30 feet in diameter might be a typical good working size, right? And then what's going to happen is, so you don't want to be too early in the morning because that's impractical. And then if you wait too long, as you get towards noon, now the shadow gets too short. And what's happening there is now that where you're going to, the 2 points of intersection are going to be so close. They're going to be, the closer you get to noon, the closer those 2 points are going to be to each other. You see?
Yeah.
And then your accuracy goes down again.
And your accuracy goes down. So you want to have enough, and obviously this is going to be relative to the scale of what you're trying to do with it. If you're going to build a house or a temple, whatever, a building that's going to be, let's just say a normal size house or building in that scale. Well, then using a 6-foot pole like these Borneo tribesmen are doing, you would probably want to have a circle, like I said, between 20 and 30 feet.
Yeah.
And then that would give you enough accuracy that you would, you drive your 2 stakes, you run your line, and now that gives you an east-west axis. Now, you can use that as the axis of your building or not, because once you've got that establishment line, once you've generated that line, the line, you would call it a generatrix, because from that, you could do a second line that would be parallel to it. So any line that's parallel to that first generatrix is also going to be east-west. And through simple geometry, you could erect a perpendicular to that line, which is then obviously going to be north and south. Now, the other thing is you can do a north-south line by going back to the method that I said, where you would have 2 verticals and a horizontal, and you hang a plumb bob. And then you have to have a back sight of some kind set against the North Star. And, because the North Star is not exactly at the North Celestial Pole, it's rotating around it a little bit. What you want to do is you want to sight against the North Star twice, 12 hours apart.
Huh.
And then split the difference. And now you've got a dead-on north orientation. And see, this would be really fun to me if we had a group of people and we were actually going to build something using these techniques.
That would be great.
Take a group out onto a building site and lay out this template on the earth. And, in the philosophy of the old builders, they believed that when you followed certain principles and practices and procedures, that the structure you had built was like a living thing. It was an organic. So when the builders of the Middle Ages were building the high Gothic cathedrals, they were looking at those as an organic living thing growing up out of the earth. And each of the stones that went into the cathedral or into the temple were prepared and shaped according to certain philosophical principles. They were actually ceremoniously, consecrated before their placing into the building, into the structure. And that was kind of the whole philosophy behind it. It wasn't just we're building a building; we're building a monument to the sacred nature of the universe, and we're building it according to these. We're using these principles that are the principles that the divine creative power of the universe is used to create the world and the living things within it. In fact, in the old, and we do this whenever we build a house, the old Scandinavian builders, whenever they would build a church, in fact, you could probably even go online. I could pull up pictures here of some of our job. We haven't done one for a few years, but basically what you do is up on the ridge beam, the gable, apex of the gable up on the ridge beam, you go and you cut a living bough, probably usually from an evergreen tree, and you attach it to the ridge beam of the building. And what that does is it's a symbol that the life power is coming up from the earth, flowing through the timbers, flowing through the structures, the beams and the girders and the rafters and things. And the life force has now infused that building.
Wow.
So that's just kind of a different way of doing it,
Yeah. But
it almost seems like imagining what you're saying, going out and laying all this out, and then having a philosophy about how you're cutting this down, all this stuff about the Gothic cathedrals. It's like we build buildings today for other purposes. Like, well, we need a place to put all this stuff. It's called a mall, and people are going to come there and buy it,
or a warehouse or whatever. Yeah.
But it almost seems like the purpose of those buildings was to build them.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to show you. I found one here. Let's see if I can get this.
Hey, I think we've got Beard Mike.
Uh-oh, Beard Mike. Okay.
We're going to have to come up with a catchy name for that.
Yeah.
A secret phrase that only the initiated will know.
Yeah.
All right. So let me do a screen share here. And
Jeez, you guys. This is incredible.
You see that?
I see it. Look at that.
That's actually in Australia, a recent topping out in Victoria. But yeah, this was a thing that they did of old. And, the Scandinavians, and that's kind of the building tradition that I come out of. My dad his nickname used to be Swede Carlson, because he was 100% Swede. My grandpa, his father was an immigrant from Sweden. And so they kind of had these traditions. The Scandinavians, I don't know if it's Scandinavians here doing this in Australia, but I would say the idea was probably not limited to them. But that's what you see here. The idea, the evergreen bough up on the ridge represents the fact that the life force is suffused. It's rising up from the earth, passing through the structural members of the building. See, and now it's almost like you're saying that it's blossoming out of the apex or roof of the building. See,
Right.
Yeah, so let's see here.
The tree is an
the tree is an ancient construction tradition. There are many such rites associated with a new edifice, including the laying of foundation stones, the signing of beams, and ribbon cuttings. But what's particularly charming about the construction tree is that it isn't associated with the beginning or the end of construction. Rather, the tree is associated with the raising of a building's highest beam or structural element. Hence the name of the rite, the topping out ceremony. It is a sign that a construction project has reached its literal apogee, its most auspicious point.
That's really cool.
That is cool, isn't it? Yeah.
OSHA would not allow this.
Well, we do it. We do it whenever we have, a building that we're topping out that has a roof. we will do that. So yeah, I've got pictures of our jobs going back 30 years ago where it's topped out with an evergreen bow.
Wow.
That's cool.
Yep.
Don't tell him.
Yeah. Don't tell OSHA about that.
We're not going to tell him, folks.
Stop share. Okay.
So I wanted to ask you, and we spend a lot of time talking about the some of the ancient construction styles, like the Cyclopean style, where every block is a different shape and size.
Yeah.
Do you think all of that has sacred geometry built into it as well, or are they doing that purely for structural reasons? I mean, have you looked at that? What's your opinion on that?
Well, yeah, I would prefer not to proffer an opinion on that, having not studied it firsthand.
Okay, yeah.
But yeah, I would. Here's what I would guess. I would guess that there is a template there. The template can be rigorously formal, or it can be very organic, and everything in between. Because you're dealing with natural forces here, and so if you're building according to the let's say the patterns of underground water, your temple is going to have a more organic feel to it.
Yes. Okay.
So it can run the gamut, like I said, from formal, rigorously formal to very organic feeling. The other thing that was important was the idea of scale and variant. I can't stress how important that is, not only in geometry and sacred architecture, but in the earth itself, in the landscapes. And we will be getting into that in the Monday night podcasts, because scale and variance is a key to understanding a lot of the forms and features of the earth that are oftentimes on too grand of a scale to perceive directly. However, they have their counterparts in a much smaller scale. Now, of course, we're now in a privileged position in the last half century, because we are now, able to access perspectives of the earth from outside the system. Think about, for thousands of years, basically your understanding of the earth is what you could see around you,
right,
from the ground. That's why when J. Harlan Bratz was studying the Channel Scablands and mapping that, it took him over 2 decades of driving, on foot, to map out what you can see from a satellite view and get instantly in a matter of seconds.
Yeah.
It took him over 2 decades to map that. And as a recognizing his skill, his maps that he came up with are very, very close to what we actually see now through satellite surveys.
Oh, wow.
So, but again, it took him over 2 decades of arduous work to draw those maps, because he couldn't see the big picture from the ground. It took him 20 years before he could see the big picture.
Yeah.
And for me, personally, like looking at things like precession in the models that you can find that are illustrating as though you're viewing it from the outside. You're looking down on the earth. You're seeing the solar system and all this stuff. So your viewpoint is far away, and you're seeing these models doing all this stuff. It's fairly easy to grasp that. But the difficult thing for me is to stand on the ground and look at the sky and say, how does that actually translate to what I would see in the sky over time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really difficult, even in the simplest thing of like how the plane of the ecliptic sort of drifts across the sky over the course of a year. These things but you can look at a map from a perspective outside the earth and sort of pick up on it easily, but it's not easily translated to our perspective, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so amazing that they figured out these ways, in such simple ways, to figure out like the north-south line. And I love that.
But you still have to marvel at the intelligence behind it.
Yes.
That's right. Yeah.
That someone would actually conceive of that.
Right. Well, I'm a big fan of Richard Feynman, and one of his things was, the simple principles are the most elegant, the most difficult to arrive at. It's you can come up with these theories and ideas that are incredibly complex, but it's very, very difficult to simplify them down. And every time when they discover like a law of physics, it turns out to be beautifully simple.
Simple and symmetrical and beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.